Hello, this is Virtualis the Chess Noob, learning and having fun with chess. Today I played a really enjoyable game against the London system. In this game, I managed to win with the elusive pawn checkmate. Continue watching to see what happened. Let's start with the review. Chess.com's algorithm. I played okay, I think, about 78% accuracy, so a little bit better than my opponent. However, we both had sort of a reasonably similar mix of good moves, inaccuracies, and some blunders as well. Reasonably equal most of the way, except for this, this blunder, mate in two blunder, which we'll look at in context in the game, but I was managed to get ahead towards the middle game and end game. Let's now go have a look at the analysis. Alrighty, so my opponent played with the white pieces and I black. They started with the queen's pawn d4, I respond with d5, bishop f4, and I play knight f6. So basically the beginning of the London system. Knight f3, bishop f5, and they play knight h4, sorry, fairly early, so with an attack on my bishop. I thought for a little while here, and I decided to bring my bishop back bring my bishop back to d7, which is equal, rather than the other option, which was to play bishop e4. I thought in that position I'll just get chased around by pawns, though apparently that would have been a perfectly fine move as well. So one of the things with the London is that it tends to be quite positional. So not very many pawn trades, a lot of maneuvering at the beginning. h3, I play c5 with a plan to potentially play g5 with a fork. Opponent brings their bishop back to h2, which makes sense in terms of that h-pawn move. Here I played a g5, pushing forward with an attack on the knight. Now, I did have a sense that maybe that wasn't going to be a good move. It's a very committal move because I have weakened the pawns on the king side. And so with that move, I really need to be thinking about castling potentially on the queen side, or maybe having to keep the king on the center. I did have a sense that that wasn't so good a move, and sort of Stockfish agrees. However, I thought this would be sort of useful at just bumping the knight out of the picture. Opponent plays knight f3, which makes sense. I develop knight c6. They play e3. I play e6. And then they play c3. So again, all the pawns are still on the board towards the end of development. I've finished my development now with d6. And the bishops now look at each other, though my feeling was that most likely neither of us will take. Opponent now plays e5, which was interesting. And here I played sort of knight e4. Opponent now plays queen f3, which is an error, but what they're trying to aim for here is a potential checkmate, so almost a scholar's mate on that weak f pawn. And this is where I made my critical blunder. So I played f6, and I thought I was being really clever here with an attack on the knight, also blocking the queen to the f7 square, so checkmate wasn't possible. However, the opponent here now has a mate into attack, which I didn't see in the game, by queen h5 with check. And then basically, regardless of whether I go here or here, the next move will be queen to f7 checkmate. So this was basically a serious blunder on my part. I didn't see it, but lucky for me, neither did my opponent, who captured my knight, and we are back to equality. So capture back with bishop, trying to maintain the pawn structure. Opponent gives a check at this point, which basically stops me from being able to castle, because I am forced to move the king. But at this point, there's not much the opponent could do. Here, I decided to play queen e8, basically inviting a queen trade. More likely, I thought they would be forced to evacuate their queen. and that's what they did, queen e2. And I thought potentially here I had a space advantage, and it looks like Stockfish agrees. So the opponent not making that sort of early queen move with the threat of checkmate by not following through, I'm now positionally advantaged. I now play f5. Opponent plays rook g1. I now push my h pawn to h5. So having some good control now of the uh, good control of the sort of king side space. Opponent plays f3. One of the reasons I had to move one of the other pawns was to also give my knight an escape square. Otherwise, it's sort of trapped because it is sort of in enemy territory. And now able to bring knight back to f6. Opponent plays knight d2, push g4. Here, however, it's not good for me to take any of the opponent's pawns, but similarly not good for the opponent to take my pawns. And I think we're all fairly principled here. Opponent long castles. I now play e5, and opponent plays queen f2. So a lot of shuffling for position here. But overall, positionally, I'm ahead. Now, at around this point, I wasn't actually entirely sure what was the best way forward. I'd sort of convinced myself in my head that I couldn't make a central pawn break. So maybe playing e4. I thought that it would end up with me not coming out ahead if I made that push. First thing first, though, I sort of brought queen to the center to sort of provide extra defense to some of these pawns and also to the knight and the bishop. Opponent now sort of closes the king side with h4, so this is pretty much impenetrable now. Rather than making a push in the center, I thought, look, how about I push the queen side pawns? Opponent has long castled, and so potentially if I sort of push these pawns forward, I could perhaps potentially destabilize the queen side. The opponent doesn't have much defenders other than pawns on this side, and maybe that would be a strategy towards a win. Opponent plays bishop d3. And you can see now Stockfish thinks it's the time for a central pawn break. That would have put me positioning quite a bit ahead, so minus 2.5. However, I decided to continue with the queenside pawn push. I thought pushing this forward was probably strategically the way to go, even though Stockfish doesn't agree. Opponent plays knight b1, and I thought at this time it was probably a mistake. I think the opponent was thinking of, bringing the knight here, rotating it to provide some defense of the king. I didn't see exactly what that was going to do for the opponent, and now I've got this move, which I think the opponent mistakenly allowed, perhaps. And even though Stockfish didn't particularly like this plan, I am now minus 1.5, so definitely ahead. So far enough now that I can start attacking the queenside pawns, and these are the pawns protecting the king after long castles. They push a c4 to avoid that capture, but I was fairly sure that this was going to be a mistake because I can capture. They capture back here, and here I thought a little while, but I thought, yep, I think I can straight out capture. That is still good for me. So I did. So happy to see that that was the best move according to Stockfish. Minus 9.5 now, so doing very well. They capture back with rook. And here I thought I could do a check with queen. They make the right move by bringing the king forward, I suppose, to give the defense. But even the best move for white here is still bad for them. I thought a little bit a while here on what would be the best move, and I thought bringing the knight out with check was probably going to be okay. I saw that capture, but now I can capture back with bishop. So potentially, serious problems. I was thought that with this transformation, I should definitely be able to trade the rook for a bishop, and I should be then ahead in the endgame. And that looks like that's what happened. Yep. And now at this point, I still have my two rooks. The opponent only has a rook, a bishop, and a knight, and I'm also I'm also one pawn ahead. So three pawns, but the opponent only has 2 pawns here versus 3 pawns. So I was fairly sure that if I played carefully, I should be able to win. opponent brings rook d1, I think with the idea of potential discovered check. However, given that I'm one rook up, I can do exactly the same thing. So they do discover check, that's fine. I now move my king opposition, asking the question, do they want to trade rooks? Because I would be perfectly happy with that. They opted not to do that. I captured that hanging pawn. I thought bringing the bishop to this square rather than all the way back would be potentially good for me because it blocks the discovered check by the opponent. Opponent moves a king out of the way. Here I bring my other rook towards the center to also cover the e-file with now an attack on that pawn. Opponent moves their bishop to protect. I suppose that makes a reasonable amount of sense. I decided to move the king to b5, and I thought potentially there might be a mating net around the king. I couldn't see where it was, but I thought that was potentially good. And with sort of potential that I could go to d1, with a fork of the opponent's two minor pieces. Here, the opponent now makes a mistake, and with pawn a3, they probably should have gone to a4 right away with check, forcing my king out of the way. However, with that move, I now have check. Opponent's king is forced backwards. I have only one move. The bishop controls these two squares, and with pawn to d3, pawn checkmate. So checkmate with the killer pawn. I was very happy to see that. I thought we would potentially have to liquidate all the remaining pieces and move towards an endgame. But here this was a very lovely check, and one of the risks with putting your king amongst a number of your pieces with some pawns. Often there's some the mobility of the king is lost. Anyway, that was a great game by my opponent, and I enjoyed this game. GG. The London system often results in closed and positional games, meaning the pawns tend to stay on the board, and there is a lot of positional manoeuvring with an eye perhaps on longer-term strategy. I made a massive blunder on move 11 by playing f6, allowing for a potential mate in 2. Luckily, my opponent didn't see it either. And perhaps fitting from the perspective of thematic symmetry, my opponent's loss was from the playing of a3 on move 38, another pawn betraying the defense of their king. I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching.